Oh, there you are. Welcome to the very first episode of the Round the Clock podcast. Today we have a very special guest, the Wizard of Oz, also known as Seven. Behind all those little square buttons on your phone, there's one of these guys at play. Seven is a UI UX mobile app designer responsible for many of the creations at our fingertips. Ever ride a Lyft, discover music on SoundHound, or put a sticker on your Instagram story? Well, Seven is one of the brave designers behind the curtain of such endeavors. Today we get into a range of fascinating topics, including bootstrapping a startup as a solopreneur, Seven's one-of-a-kind bike exchange app called Sprocket, how to approach financial and business planning as a solopreneur, climate consciousness, artificial intelligence, biking, city planning, craft beer, and of course, the inner workings and nature of reality. Coming at you live from Portugal. Here we go. Oh, and one more thing, stay around the clock. Thank you. All right, and welcome to another edition of Round the Clock. Today we have a very special guest, Seven.
Hey, hello.
Hey, did I get that right, Seven?
Yeah, that is my full legal name. You got it right.
It is like is it like Madonna? Like there's no, do you have a last name or?
I had to get a last name because, I design sign-up systems professionally. So
Okay.
I know that if I shortened it to just the first name, I wouldn't be able to sign up for any apps.
Gotcha. It's kind of like, well, did you ever hear about in Sweden, somebody tried to name their child Metallica?
No.
But fortunately you're in Portugal where they, I guess they have a more liberal approach there, if you will.
Yeah, I did look it up online, and there are people every year that name their kids Superman. So I don't remember the count, but it's impressively not zero.
Yeah, better that than Ubermensch,
Absolutely.
Yes. So that's interesting. Did you consider like 6 or 8, or were you had your
Good question. And then there's the 7, 8, 9 jokes and the Seinfeld jokes. Yes. So I went to Burning Man, and I had the name Stefan. And at Burning Man, somebody has to give you a play name. So I said, my name is Stefan when I was ordering coffee, and somebody misheard me because it was loud and wrote 7 on my coffee cup. And I went away from that week going, holy shit, that's a way better, way cooler name.
Okay. That's putting it together. I knew I had a friend that would she would always tell stories about Burning Man that went something like, one time at Burning Man, like you ever see that movie American Pie?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was sort of the vibe, but I digress. Was it fun? Did you have a good time? Was it enlightening?
Oh yeah, and in fact that's what inspired me to start my business.
That's amazing. Well,
yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your business and your background? Maybe your background first, or wherever you want to start. Like for those of us that don't know Seven, we want the full scoop.
All right. Well, I guess I'll start with the background. So I'm an artist that makes money. So professionally, I'm a UI UX designer, whereas I'm now called a mobile app designer. And I went to college 2006 to 2010. That's right when the iPhone came out, as well as the App Store. So I kind of pivoted into that and never looked back and rode that whole wave. So I worked for many Silicon Valley companies like SoundHound and Verizon and Lyft. And I've designed a lot of the apps on your phone. And so when I went to Burning Man, I was thinking about starting a side project. And my idea was, if I start a side project, even if I fail, I become a better app designer, because now I know how to build an app from the ground up. And if I succeed, then I have my own app and my own revenue stream. So I went to Burning Man, talked to a lot of really smart people, and they were all saying that they're really concerned about climate change. And Burning Man also has a ton of bike riding, as you may know.
Yeah.
And those two things kind of percolated in my head, and I came away thinking, you know what? I've had this idea for a bike app, and I should really pursue that.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be good for the world. And so I started Sprocket.
Okay, awesome. And yeah, for those that, when I think it's a great looking app. Like my experience with like buying and selling bikes is fairly limited. definitely limited on the selling side, but typically it was like a Craigslist sort of endeavor. Well, there was a bike shop in Santa Fe where I bought my last bike. The Broken Spoke was the name of the bike shop, which is a fun name for a shop, I guess.
Hopefully your spokes aren't broken when you buy bikes from them.
Yeah, maybe they did some repairs too. I don't know. But I actually they told me that this bicycle I was looking at was it was Gene Hackman's bicycle, and it was $175. And I was like, this will be a great story to tell my father, so I have to buy it now. Because you brought up Seinfeld, like the episode with where George buys John Voight's car.
I don't know that one, but tell me more.
But then later he's in the car with Jerry. He's so excited that he's got John Voight's car, and he can tell his friends, like, I'm driving John Voight's car. And he, it's really giving him this buzz. And then Jerry goes looking through the glove compartment and looks at the former registration or owner's card and notices that it's spelled differently. And then he says something along the lines like, hey, sometimes I'll spell my name with a G and an I. And then he gives a nice little Jerry Seinfeld demonic laugh of sorts. There I go. I'm out of focus. Not existentially, just literally.
Oh, yeah. You got to cast a magic spell to return yourself back into focus.
Yes. Look at that. That's what happens when you talk too much. Let's try this.
Yeah, that works.
See?
So that's the trick.
That's the trick. So anyways, and so I noticed, I actually knew one app designer before you in another life, just one. And oddly enough, he had the same exact pair of glasses. So it makes me wonder, can you see, is that are those kind of design, app designer glasses? Do they help you see do they give you X-ray vision for the analytics or the algorithms embedded?
Yeah, absolutely. They let me see around corners and into the future. And
oh, really? Wow.
Days past.
So, do you have any stock tips or
stock tips? Don't buy oil company stock.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because because it's not gonna be here forever, right?
Yeah.
Those resources. Yeah. I actually have a friend of mine has this. She started a group called Climate Hang, and it's sort of centered around kind of it's climate change and psychedelic healing. The interaction there, pretty interesting. They're pretty active on the climate summits and whatnot.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of those groups popping up.
Yeah, I would imagine, especially at Burning Man, right?
The thing with oil stocks, now that we kind of got into them, I went and dug into my wife's 401k because we had a discussion about who supports climate change more. And if you actually drill into a lot of those financial investment vehicles, you can see the specific stocks they are, because they're usually a bundle of things that are supposed to kind of distribute risk for somebody across multiple different corporations.
Right.
So you can actually go and see what your 401k is invested in. And it was surprising for me, but more so for her, just how many oil companies, arms manufacturers, and other companies she was invested in that she had no idea she was participating in their businesses.
Sure. Yeah, that's a legit concern. I mean, now they have this whole ESG movement. I don't know if you've heard of that in the investing world, but
I have not, by the acronym, maybe.
So environmental, it stands for environmental social governance. So basically these are the they're sort of funds, baskets of securities, which is what's, kind of embedded within most 401ks. A lot of them do, a lot of 401ks have kind of Vanguard or Fidelity funds within them, index funds, and that are just very broadly diversified, like you said. But these are kind of excluding like, like oil companies, tobacco companies, gambling, things like that.
Well, we found a lot of interesting things in there. Like she was invested in Fox News, and neither of us love Fox News. But
Right.
the only way
Yeah.
you'd know that is if instead of, dumbly getting involved with a 401k, you actually dig a little deeper to understand what a 401k is.
Yeah,
What's in yours.
it opens up some pretty hefty philosophical debates, really, because then you start to wonder, like, like then you start to think about like your tax dollars, for instance, like other areas where you don't have much control over what's being done with your money. I guess like in your case, you had quite a bit of control because you decided to leave the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
To an
Yep.
extent. I mean, you're still a US citizen, so you're still responsible for taxes to a degree.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
But
also, my business is in California, so until and unless I move it, I still have to pay the annual LLC fee, the
right.
taxes for the business, the
What is
taxes.
it? $800, the franchise fee?
Yeah, it's almost like a mafia protection racket. You pay them the 800, and then they protect you from getting sued. And if you don't pay them the 800, they put a lien on you.
They
And
see you. Yeah, right.
yeah,
Well, that's cool of them. Way to go, California. We love you.
yeah. But at the same time, I would suggest that if someone's looking at starting a business, to get at least an LLC, because people don't appreciate how litigious our country is and how easy it is to get sued. Some of the things I've done at some companies as a mobile app designer has been protecting companies from liability just by doing things like having a good terms of service screen, at the start of your app.
Right.
It makes it clear that there is a terms of service and that you're agreeing to it. Just simple stuff like that.
Disclosure. Yeah. Disclosure, right? It's important. I mean, for your own protection, obviously. And just for those that aren't aware, LLC, it's pretty commonplace acronym, but it's limited liability corporation. So it's basically protecting your personal assets in the event of some kind of, maybe one example would be like your creditors, are coming after you for personal assets, you're protected if you have the LLC, right?
Yeah, for me, it's a very clear-cut thing. Like I run a used bicycle marketplace, and there is such a thing as used bicycles injuring people. So it's very important for me as a facilitator of people who are buying and selling used stuff.
Yes.
I can't assess, the integrity of it. That it's very clear that you're agreeing to terms of service, that I don't know who's buying and selling what. I'm just getting people to meet up. And then if something breaks, it's the fault of the person who sold it to you, not me. And then if I get sued, my LLC gets sued. And so in the event that it becomes unsurmountable, I can have my LLC file bankruptcy, and I myself don't have to file bankruptcy. So it's that kind of
thing. Well put. Well put. Yeah. And like, I know we had talked a little bit about, have you considered like an S corp structure? I know that's often like a, business owners will, eventually, like once they sort of reach a certain revenue goal, they might decide like to pay themselves a salary and then to kind of like avoid taxation on a certain percentage of the revenue generated by the business. But, typically that's not worth it, like with a relatively, like when something's getting off the ground. But I don't know if have you considered that, or do you have employees, or?
Yeah, man, I'm like not succeeding but not failing businessman, and right now I make pretty good beer money every year.
Oh,
So
good.
it's not yet the stage where I would go to that level.
Yeah, when you say good beer money, do you mean like craft beer money versus like Budweiser money, or?
Yeah, like I can take my wife out on dates occasionally. I can buy myself nice craft beer, not even canned, but like draft. So I'm moving up in the world slowly and steadily.
There you go. Have you were you like a Lagunitas fan back in the California days, or?
I'm always adventurous and I'm open to different beer types. You know, it's actually funny because I've done a bike tour through the town of Lagunitas, and I stopped and asked the guys there, where is Lagunitas? And apparently it's somewhere north of Lagunitas. They're not actually headquartered in the town of Lagunitas.
Sounds about right. You know, fun fact, I actually played at that brewery one time when I was like 27. I was touring with a rockabilly band all over the country, and we played the Lagunitas Brewery.
Hardcore.
Yeah. There's some good brewery venues out there, like up in Taos, New Mexico. I played a really fun show with a band from Liverpool called Conan. I was in this death metal band called Street Tombs, and that was a pretty fun, great venue, great sound. You know, everybody in New Mexico knows about it, like Santa Fe, Taos, and actually this Climate Hang thing is sort of headquartered in Taos. But you know, my friend, most of them, they bought an Earthship there, but they're like headquartered, or she lives in New York. She works for Google actually. And her partner, or co-founder, if you will, I believe he's in Los Angeles. So it's interesting. But like full circle to the ESG conversation, you know, if you are thinking in that direction, like typically what people will do is like choose one of these ESG funds, or they might, I don't know if you probably can't, there's a new thing these days called direct indexing, which kind of allows you to like cherry pick what you want and don't want within like a broadly diversified index, but it can be a little complicated for, you know, your average retail investor or 401k.
Yeah, I've seen that. And
yeah.
I think I agree. And to expand on that, I've read enough random books to know a little bit about economics and like the diversification of risk being an important pillar of investing.
Sure.
But I don't think people read much these days, unfortunately. So I would not expect the average person to even have the basics of knowing how to invest in order to like de-risk themselves. And this is how you get people that, you know, they enter the Wall Street casino and they get wiped out, and then they complain that it was all the big guy's fault.
Right.
But why 401ks are marketed to employees is because it's something that's a fire and forget. You don't know what you're invested in, but hopefully it's diverse enough that it's generally gonna more or less go up and down.
I think some people, even if they are sort of like climate minded and such, or just like, you know, I've seen people kind of go back and forth on it, because like the ESG funds have kind of come under fire recently, because like what's happened is like a lot of companies have engaged in like kind of what they call like greenwashing practices to kind of make themselves appear more on that kind of like the new wavelength of kind of like sustainability or ethics.
Colloquially known as bullshit.
Yeah, like kind of like wolf in sheep's clothing type stuff. So they've kind of come under fire recently, but because it was sort of like when I became interested in them actually like when I was like in high school, and there was like one fund that was doing it, Calvert, and now they've sort of like joined forces with you know, kind of like larger custodians and you know, fund offering entities, if you will. And yeah, it's been interesting to watch the progression, because they've sort of like it looks a lot like the S&P 500 these days, like your typical ESG fund. You know, it's pretty close, you know, and there are like companies within those funds that you wouldn't think are kind of like, you know, there could be gas companies that are just like, that are accepted because they're kind of like doing it as well as they can. You know, they're hitting some kind of standard. So you really just have to like do your due diligence if you're looking into something like that, and make sure it actually aligns. You know, you might still be surprised when you look at the kind of the portfolio of an ESG fund.
You can't trust nobody in this world. You know, you would say even just a couple of years ago, invest in Tesla because Tesla going up. right? And now it comes out that like the Cybertruck is a total dud that rusts in sunlight and can snap your fingers right off, right? The electric car is a thing that works if you have chargers where you're at, but it doesn't work so well if you're in a country that doesn't have chargers. And it's an electric car if you're somewhere like in California where there's a lot of wind and solar, but it's a coal car if you're somewhere in Virginia where your local power plant is literally a coal plant, right?
Right.
That's where the electricity comes
from. It's made me wonder, like, you know, kind of like what's the footprint of, because I've heard that argument before, but like what's the actual footprint of, you know, is it still, even though it is coal at the sort of central hub of the, you know, kind of like electric factory, the like electricity plant, electric factory is a Philadelphia venue that's no longer in existence. But I digress. You know, like if anybody actually has kind of like, you know, I'm sure there's studies like kind of assessing the footprint of each option, you know, like of driving a, let's say you had like an electric vehicle in the worst area for that, like, you know, would you say Virginia or West Virginia or something?
Coal country, probably somewhere around there.
Yeah. Like what would be the actual carbon footprint of an electric vehicle coming from that versus an electric car? Like I would imagine the electric car still prevails in that situation, but I could be wrong. I mean, well, or yeah.
You go like into the weeds, like say you're a savvy investor, right? And you're trying to figure out if you should invest in Tesla because it's an environmentally friendly company, or it tells you that it is. Yeah. Like according to my research, 50% of the entire environmental cost of a car is in manufacture. So whether you manufacture the gas car or you manufacture an electric car, you spent 50% of that energy just in manufacturing a 410 vehicle. So already, if you have, you know, the lifetime of a car is what, like 10 years on average before it falls apart. Some people are taking these gas cars off the road prematurely because they're marketed so heavily that they need to be involved in the green revolution, that buying a green car and replacing a totally fuel efficient, you know, Ford gas car actually maybe doing more harm to the planet than just wearing the stuff down that we already paid the cost to manufacture.
Yeah, it kind of like brings up that I guess there's a parallel in the kind of like smartphone technology with like the cobalt mining, you know, like could you be like, is there such thing as a vegan iPhone? I don't know. Yeah.
The vegan police come after you if you don't use it correctly, like in Scott Pilgrim.
Well, I mean, there's just like, you know, like I don't know, like, you know, veganism is about like animal rights, but like what about like so I would imagine like human rights falls under that umbrella as well. And if like there's people in like awful conditions like in these cobalt mines, like would that be considered a vegan product, you know?
Well, so I'm glad you bring that up because I think where my business is concerned, I'm in this new growing used stuff market. And as things continue to progressively get worse with climate change, I think we're going to start seeing people buy used stuff more, right? And it's a great way of prolonging the life of things before throwing them away or even attempting to recycle them. And it reduces the need for these kind of materials. So you can say, sure, phones or cars require cobalt, and you could say, sure, I'm concerned about the chain that this cobalt pumps through to get into these products. But at least if I need a phone and I go to the secondhand market and I buy a perfectly good iPhone, I'm not generating that demand. I'm not paying for that labor. Right.
It's like
so much that I'm paying to help recycle.
Yeah, it's like you're like, oh well, like, you know, the animal's already been killed, and here I'm at a kid's birthday party, and there's a plate full of burgers. Like, what am I gonna just? It's a bad analogy.
Well, it's same analogy applies as with cars. You know, you buy a new car and it loses what, like 20% of its value right as it rolls off the lot the same day. So people aren't used to buying used smartphones, but it's the same. You buy like $1,000 iPhone, or you can find the same one for 500. same brand new model just on a used marketplace somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, it's, you know, conversely, like it might, like technology might be what kind of like gets us out of the hole. You know, like if we think in terms of like clean nuclear or something, you know, like as far as like climate change, carbon footprint stuff, like it seems like to me that seems to have more promise than getting humans to like adjust their kind of human tendencies like laziness or selfishness.
Well, you got to
Greed.
tell people why it's worth it to them, and not, you know, try to convince them of the altruistic goals.
Right, exactly. Like this
Like
is like profitable for your business. Like you just like can't afford to do anything else. Like that's gonna like shift things, you know? Like
you're going to save money, you're going to get something better, you know, at a cheaper price. You're going
mhm.
to make something that like lasts longer, because for the reduced price you can get something at a higher quality than a full price lower quality new version of the thing,
Yeah.
right? So
No,
there's
I
many
was
great benefits.
when I first saw your app, like it was very like pleasing to look at and like, you know, just seemed like a very like modern app. And then I like I didn't fully understand what it was, but I thought it was like for some reason I thought it was like bird at first, you know. I was like, oh, this is like, you know, like it just feels very like hip and modern, you know.
Well,
And then I
birds of
like
a
scroll
feather
down and I
fly
see these
together.
like photos of like used bicycles and I was like, huh, like there was a like I was like I had to kind of like connect the dots, you know, a little bit, but like um that was a weird, you know, I don't know, do they still have that? Or I guess they do. There was a lot of controversy around that with like old, you know, elderly people tripping on the sidewalks because like again, like here's like a perfect kind of like metaphor for this predicament. It's like something starts out with good intentions and then we see like the human kind of, not to be like too myopic about it or dystopic, but like you see like sort of like human nature like sort of like makes a mess of this sort of like, oh, like, you know, like now there's these scooters like all over the sidewalk and like elderly people are tripping on them and like it's a big, you know, it's dangerous and like this, you know, like.
Well, I mean, I worked signing people up for scooters at Lyft, as well as
Oh
like
really?
share bikes. So I know a little bit about that, but I think where I bring value to society is if you buy a thing that's used, you own the thing. And because you own the thing, you're motivated to take care of it, and you're
Hmm.
motivated to store it out of the public thoroughfare where people would be tripping over it, right? The
Yeah.
thing that's kind of problematic about shared micromobility vehicles in public spaces is, especially in the early years, the companies just drop shipped them all over the streets, and we didn't have a culture based around, okay, there's this new technology, how do we work with it? Like, how do we talk about it? How do we relate to it? And so, yeah, people would leave them in the middle of street intersections. People would throw them in the water fountains. You know, people would uh, put them in ways that would cause car accidents or physical accidents. Like it wouldn't be uncommon, I think, a couple of years ago to walk around San Francisco and find scooters in trees because people would see like how far up they can throw them.
Oh wow. Well, what about like those like city? I know in Philly, there's like Philadelphia, there's bike exchange, like sort of like these where you could rent a bike, right? And then like, but you have to put it back. I think you have to. I've never done it, but you have to put it back in the bike hub. You know, like probably you
Yeah,
can't just like leave it on the street. But it kind of like I think maybe part of the fun with the bird thing was that it's a little bit like it almost feels like it's a mix between like a convenient form of public transportation and Pokemon Go. Like you get to do the scavenger hunt for the scooter, you know. So like it's a little more, you know, there isn't that kind of like I think that's, you know, there's just this kind of magical quality to it. I remember um, my my partner and I we went to Venice Beach and we ran it. She was all psyched about, you know, renting these birds and it's fun. I mean, I gotta say it's like a fun think that there's something magical about it, but like it is kind of gross when you see them sprawled out everywhere,
Yeah.
especially in Venice. I mean,
There's two types of micromobility vehicles. There's scooters and bikes that you need to dock to a certain place, and that's kind of like the older model. And then later, companies figured out that they can have kind of dockless, which means that you have some kind of lock or some kind of device on them that lets you lock them anywhere. And as long as you can have that, then you don't have to end your ride at a dock, which creates that magical, seamless experience of you pick it up wherever and you drop it off wherever. And I think where Lyft succeeded is because they actually talk to the cities that they're in, and they actually try to proactively work with making sure cities are kept neat and tidy and things are kept out of the way. They have worked on docks that incorporate scooters and bikes, and they kind of have incentives where, yeah, if you have a bike that doesn't need a dock, if you still go and dock it, you might get a discount or you might get some other bonuses from doing that, especially if its battery is running out. And the docks also serve as a charging pad.
Yeah.
So once the things are docked there, then they don't have to send out a van to the middle of nowhere just to pick up a bike to then take it, charge it, then deploy it again.
Gotcha. Yeah. So there's like kind of an incentive structure there for the consumers, sounds like.
Yeah. But the best thing is still if you have, your own bicycle, because then you have no need to deal with batteries or depending on an external system or spending the money that it takes you on a subscription or a one-time basis to ride something, because shared rides can be quite pricey, especially if you're doing it consistently on a commute. You can rack up in the course of a year commuting on these things the amount that you could buy a really nice used road bike for. And sure, it's not going to have an electric battery, but you could buy a really nice one. And if you're commuting for several years, you might as well just buy an e-bike at that point.
Yeah, I think, obviously, like, so as far as like, for me, I work from home and I live in a town that I can walk to, like, which is my kind of ideal situation. I do enjoy bike riding, but I have like, I have scoliosis, so I couldn't do it in a sustainable way. Like
That's a cool word though.
What's that?
It sounds hardcore. Scoliosis. It's like metal.
It is, yeah. And it is kind of hardcore. Yeah, it's definitely a hardcore word because it's a hardcore condition. Where your spine is curved, and when you hit your 30s or so, you start to like you're sort of like not aware of it in the early part of your life, but then you start to kind of like feel that sense of like falling apart quicker. So I would imagine like the target demographic for like biking commuters is like a certain age bracket. But it doesn't have to be, necessarily. It just have to, and maybe like, I don't know, maybe there's the reclining bikes, or what are they called? They're the
recumbents.
Recumbent, yeah. I have one of those like for exercise, just like a stationary one.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of choices for people, and they come in all shapes and sizes, and even you can get, as you mentioned, recumbents that are electric for people with certain conditions.
There you go.
The biggest benefit for recumbents, and they're usually like a 3-wheeled low to the ground bike for people that don't understand what we're talking about, is as people get older, especially men, our knees give out. And so with arthritis and everything, it becomes a lot easier to bike when you're closer to the ground. Right. And fun fact, the only reason we have these upright 2-wheel bikes is because the UCI that runs the races around the world has requirements for being competitive and being an exciting race that bikes have to be upright with 2 wheels. That's not actually even the most efficient form of bike. Okay. Because the most problematic thing with bikes is wind resistance. That's like 50, 60, 70% of what you're fighting all the time. So if you can be lower to the ground, you have less wind resistance. So they're way more efficient.
Yeah.
And in general, like when you talk about micromobility, it just depends on the person's context and budget. And sometimes it makes sense because you're going a short distance to grab a scooter. And sometimes you're going a longer distance and it makes sense to grab a bike share bike. And sometimes you're living with a day-to-day commute where you're healthy enough to bike, 10, 15, 20 miles, in which case maybe you purchase a bike. And in some cases, you might be living closer to 40 miles away from work, in which case you would buy an electric bike, right? So for different people, there's different solutions. I think the weirdest and most exciting one I've heard recently is if you're in the Netherlands and you are of limited mobility, they have these little cars that can go on bike paths. And I think they're gas powered, like not gasoline, but like gas tank. You know what I'm talking about? So they can share the infrastructure with bikes in the Netherlands, but they allow people who would not be able to pedal a bike to still get around in the same way. There's lots of that.
Yeah, and I think city planning seems to have come a long way in terms of making it, like, especially in the Netherlands, like making it a safer way to go about your commute, right? Certain towns have a little ways to go, but I think you can always like find, in a lot of like the cosmopolitan cities, kind of maybe that are more progressively minded, there's, you can like sort of like if you had to say commute to work, you could figure out like, okay, there's this bike path and I can sort of like, and then there's a bike lane on that road. Like you can kind of like get your route figured out, which I've done in the past. I used to commute when I lived in Brooklyn. I used to commute over the Williamsburg Bridge on a bike. Not the most ergonomic bike, I will say. It was like my mom's like a Schwinn from the 70s. It was bright yellow. And it was actually it was beautiful, but it was taken from me one day in Washington Square Park. Yeah, it just vanished.
Well, so I work on that too, and so the two main inspirations between like starting my business and seeing societal impact of it is to get more people on bikes, because I know if there's more demand for bikes, public infrastructure for them will improve. And two, to be a good partner to the cycling community and to the bike industry and help prevent some of the bike theft that we see and some of the prevalence of it on marketplaces that we also see. So in terms of bike theft, I'm sorry that happened to you, but I will tell anybody who's watching here to register their bike serial number, which they can find on their frame on a little website called Bike Index. And that's a serial number registry where if your bike is found later down the line, people can go and check for that serial number. And if they find your contact information, they can contact you and you might be able to get your bike back.
Okay, so, well, that's good to know. I wish I'd known that back in 2005.
Yeah, they may have not been around in 2005. So
probably, yeah, maybe I don't know. But it was, it was sad. But nothing lasts forever in the cold November rain, if you will.
Yeah, there's been one too many times I've come home without wheels on my bikes. Definitely a thing.
Yeah, you got to have a good chain or bike lock, or maybe some like some hologram, like kind of like maybe like a hologram guard dog or something would be.
Yeah, you see all sorts of solutions on YouTube. Actually, you've seen seats that disappear to bikes that are big bikes that are tied to poles. People try to ride off on them. All sorts of clever things, but I think that you will have a much more pleasant bike ownership experience if you own a U-lock and maybe also a chain lock for your wheels.
Yeah,
and don't park it outside if you.
Yeah, don't tell people that Gene Hackman used to own your bicycle, because that That's like
Yeah,
if it said Gene Hackman's bicycle on it, I mean, how long do you think that would last?
10 milliseconds.
If I were to like post on your, do you think I could like there could be a significant like markup return on investment there if I were to just put Gene Hackman's former bicycle in the?
Yeah, you should try it.
Do you think I could generate a little buzz around that, or like
Yep.
is could there be like a bidding system or like an
We
auction? That'd be
we
kind of
don't have
cool.
a bidding system, but we do have a lot of different ways you can get contacted. So if you're getting offers on different chat platforms about your Sprocket listing, you can always hike the price up.
Yeah. Sounds good. Do you have like a featured items on the main page, or is it kind of like very democratic in a sense, like whatever is relevant to the?
We don't have a featured section quite yet, but I think that if you list something and you are showing us in different ways that you're not a bike thief, like you add your serial number to show that it's not a stolen bike, you add your proof of ride history through Strava to show that you've been riding this bike and didn't steal it yesterday. And if you pay for the listing to show that you're also not a thief, we will rank you higher. And so
Gotcha.
you'll get more offers and you'll sell faster.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I would like to take a quick bathroom break if you're okay with that. I think we're doing good. You feeling good?
Yeah.
All right, and we're back. We're both we poked a few holes in our bladder, and we are ready to rock, ladies and gentlemen. We are the hot new thrash metal band on the block. We're called Scoliosis, and
Skulls to the bones.
Scoliosis and Sprocket. That's our working pen name, if you will. And so yeah, like I know we were having an interesting conversation about this, like what are some like kind of interests, or what are some things that we might think about as like financial planners, like with solopreneurs, you know, that are kind of like venturing off into the territory that you are. And like one of the big questions that tends to come up is like typically, you know, like there are different ways to approach cash flow in terms of like how much do you spend on your like you know, like housing, like a lot, you know, kind of like one of the popular frameworks is like 30% on housing, 20% towards savings, 30% towards like, you know, other living expenses and fun. So, but does that change like the sort of the 20% part? Because like, does that change with a solopreneur? Because you're trying to really like this, that's your investment, you know, and it's, I guess the sort of from a risk standpoint, you know, like you know that you're taking more risk. Like anybody that's starting a business has to take on some risk. So you're like, I guess the big question that we'll get a lot is like, do I just kind of like put all my money into my business, like all my spare, you know, kind of spare income, or do I try to maintain sort of like that status quo, like 20% into my like investment accounts or 401k?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of people ask that at like Shark Tank or other you know, podcasts. The answer I typically hear from very rich people that have started as entrepreneurs and made it, and it's the same kind of advice I'll give is don't quit your day job unless you really know what you're doing. And the reason is like if you just look statistically, most small businesses fail. Like most businesses in America are small businesses, but most small business owners don't know what they're doing. And I've learned so much on this journey that I didn't know what I was doing when I was starting, right? Like I did everything wrong. And if I didn't have a job, I would, you know, have had to give up a lot sooner. So the fact that I had a side job and I had the income coming in, and I could kind of put a little bit into my business, see what works, see what didn't, put a little bit more into my business, tweak it a little bit, see things through. That allowed it to exist for 10 years now. And me not giving up for 10 years now got me to a point where I was really lucky that I got to work for a small startup called Camcord and do a social screenshot sharing network. And then ended up coming with some features that ended up getting incorporated into Instagram. That company went under, and then my team got acqui-hired to Lyft. I ended up working at Lyft, designing their sign-in system for like 3 years. And then I got a lot of Lyft equity, and that Lyft equity allowed me later to switch to working on my project full-time, right? But because I was working on my project for that entire period of time, using some of the money from my savings, some of the money from my full-time work as a Silicon Valley app designer, I was able to figure out about my app a lot of things that I took for granted or had completely backwards or didn't understand. Like I pivoted from being a database of bike information to actually being a bike marketplace. So if I took my entire Lyft equity and I aped it now into trying to make a bike database, I would just waste a lot of money,
Yeah. So when you say like your Lyft equity, are you like is there like do you approach that with like is there a burn rate? Are you like sort of like realizing gains or to kind of like fund your business, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, I would say burn rate. So I would say like something on the order of how I'm going about it. I have maybe 2 or 3 years of runway, right? And I'm like, okay, what am I doing to like get towards break even or towards getting profitable? And one of the things that I'm doing is on the surface levels, I'm shipping features, I'm looking for customer feedback. But really, really what I'm doing is I'm looking to see if I'm meeting growth. So I'm seeing that the amount of people installing my app is greater than 1-to-1 to people that are uninstalling, which means growth. And if I'm not doing that, then whatever I'm doing is obviously not working, and it's not going to be a sustainable business because it's a customer-to-customer business. And then the other thing is figuring out that puzzle of, as an indie app developer that's bootstrapped, how do I make money with an app? Because there's some standard ways to do it. Yes. But I'm doing it for the first time and I'm doing everything wrong. So like, what are those things? And am I reaching milestones and unlocks? So for example, I figured out that on Android, you need to have advertising because people don't want to buy in-app purchases. And on iOS, you need in-app purchases, specifically subscriptions, because people are willing to pay for them, a lot of money on iOS. So just sold my first $100 subscription. So very happy that that points in the right direction towards that being something the business needs to focus on. Yeah. And I can sort of now start to see how that would be a profitable business model, right? Or
yeah, I was definitely curious about how your business like generates revenue, makes money. So it sounds like, would it be like more on the, so I guess you have ads on the Android side and subscriptions on the iOS side. Is there any kind of like, do you take any cut from the sales or of the bikes, or is that an element?
So I'm actually weird in that in terms of trying to be an innovative business, I figured out a completely unique niche. This is my accent coming in.
It's I actually did a poll recently on LinkedIn. Is it niche or niche? And I would say that the results are still. That's why I wanted him in here. Sorry, woof, woof. It's just the mailman. It'll.
Yeah. So I run a niche.
Hang on one second. Let me just. Sorry, I don't want to. He'll settle down. Charlie, treat. So bad. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Just mailman drama, really. You know, you ever heard of it?
You
It's
gotta
worse
keep
than Milkman drama with this guy.
you gotta keep the middleman at bay.
That's right. Yeah.
The
But so
the
we were talking revenue streams, and
you got out of focus.
again, I don't know.
I think it's because you walked out of the room and back
Yeah,
in.
that'll do it. All right. I'm back in focus, and it's just camera stuff. It's not actually my kind of like, it's not a metaphor for my existence.
You are because you're camera, not because you are. I
Like when I leave, when I get off this camera, like I won't be out of focus anymore. Some people, like, they might get off the camera and they're still out of focus, and it kind of like walks around, you know, it kind of follows them around.
yeah, like that story Mist by Stephen King. You're just constantly in a fog.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, there's a new king in town. His name's Seven, right?
Yeah.
Seven King.
Our subscription
Yeah.
icon is actually a crown. So
Oh, there you go. You should be, yeah, you should change your name to Seven King. That'd be cool.
yeah, actually on LinkedIn, 7-Eleven keeps looking up my account because my name is Seven.
Wow. Well, so that's yeah, fun stuff. So where were we in terms of like revenue streams? Like we were talking about, like, do you, I guess, like like how does Craigslist make money? Do they, like, at this point?
They have some things are free and they sell advertising, and then some things above, in some categories above some monetary value, they take a fee. The thing is, we thought that would be a little hard to build, so we postponed building that. And then it turned out that laws came to pass because of looting in the wake of the pandemic that made it so that if you are taking a fee, then you are a marketplace facilitator, and then you are subject to all sorts of additional regulations, which mandate that as a marketplace, you have to take people's tax information, identity information, and a whole bunch of contact information, stuff like your personal address. So by actually not taking that stuff, and by charging a fee up front of like $1 per listing, first listing is free, and then $1 after that.
Okay.
It makes it so that we don't have to actually take your information. So in terms of a privacy standpoint, we end up being one of the best marketplaces. So
That's awesome.
you can, yeah, you can list with us.
Less red tape, less compliance type stuff.
Yeah, you probably still need to pay taxes if you sell more than X amount of bicycles within a year, depending on what the regulation is. I think it was supposed to be 600 within a year or something like that, but they may have pushed it by another year. I'm not a tax advisor, don't blame me. But because we're not forced to collect your taxpayer information, we're not forced to block you from using our platform if you do sell something above that number. You just have to report it yourself. And that means that if somebody was to do the unthinkable and hack us, there's nothing useful in our database to hack us over. And so nothing that you have to worry about losing.
Yeah, so yeah, I like that. It's kind of like you mentioned earlier, like when we first kind of connected, like you run a very lean operation. So it's like lean in the sense of like, you know, kind of like lessening your liability and risk helps with that kind of the lean nature of a business. Yeah, you know, because there's, you know, sometimes like if the more, yeah, because if the more kind of like you have to interact with legislation and compliance, like the more there's a time element, or maybe you have to hire somebody that handles that side of the business, and that can be a whole other kind of involved endeavor. So I think that's a smart approach, smart and strategic approach on your part.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will say that if you are running a business, do talk to a lawyer at least once, because you do need a terms of service and privacy policy that someone who actually knows what they're doing look through. And you do need to kind of have a point of contact if you have legal questions, because they will come up and new legislation will come up. So it's always a good investment. But to talk about some of the other privacy stuff we do, like for contacting people, we don't have chat inside of our app, but we give you all the options like WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal or Facebook Messenger, and you go and chat outside of our app through those. And that means that they're better encrypted. You get the notifications from your favorite app if people contact you about things you listed with us. And again, we are then subject to less requirements, and we have to collect less of your personal information and store it on our end.
Okay. Well, I think that makes sense, and that I think I was going to suggest, would you like to participate in a fun activity real quick?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna play you a video, okay? And I would like you to maybe like kind of like explain to this person, sort of hypothetically, or like kind of like role playing, like why they might want to download your app.
Sure.
Does that work?
Sounds great.
Does that sound fun?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, 1 sec. All right.
This guy.
All right. So this is a young Frank Zappa debuting his musical composition to be performed on a bicycle on the Steve Allen Show back in the 60s. Let's take a look.
Beautiful.
Hello? Sounds like the Kyoto of Japan. I can play my nose. Please, do that again. I mean that other thing.
Oh, I don't remember that part.
Little do you know that he also identifies as a bicycle.
All right. Well, I think we get the idea there. But nice work, young Frank. This is pre-Mothers of Invention for all those Zappa heads out there. So that's a special nugget from the past there, which happens to be bicycle themed, very much so. So young Frank Zappa, meet 7. What do you have to say to Frank?
Right. So if you are shopping for a bike for all of your musical needs, you can download us on Android, iOS, or you can get our marketplace on the web at sprocket.bike. There's thousands of bikes available, and you can filter by Schwinn or whichever other cruiser types that you fancy as your musical instrument. Negotiate over your favorite messaging platform. Meet up, check out the bike, buy it. And we offer like a lot of ways to make sure that it's not stolen, from serial number, bike registry, to proof of ride history with Strava, and soon proof of payment as another layer of showing that you're not a thief because you're willing to spend money on a bike marketplace. And all of these kind of combine together to make it the most theft-proof marketplace available.
Awesome. Well, I'll be Frank. I'll be Frank Zappa. Sounds great. I'm on iOS, or no. What would Frank be on? He'd probably be on Android, I would think. But
Yeah.
yeah. So, and at that point in his career, I'm sure he would want kind of like a lean relationship with his app. So I'm sure you would pick out like some kind of like relevant app advertisements that would not, kind of infuriate him, and might be useful to other kind of consumer endeavors in the future. And that's awesome. Thank you for the recommendation. I will download Sprocket, and I look forward to passing it on to Dweezil and Moon in the future.
You're welcome. Appreciate it. And please give us a rating.
Yes, we will. We will give you a rating. And there's one thing I got to ask you though, because I remember you told me that you worked on Instagram stories on Instagram stickers and storying posts, which are two features that I am very familiar with and engage in on a regular basis. I might even go so far as to say that they've changed my life.
Oh, wow.
So
you're welcome.
Thank you for that. What was your involvement there? Like, tell us more.
So in a oblique way, I was involved on those features because in 2016, 2017, I worked for Camcord, which was a first video game live streaming app that competed with Twitch. And it changed into a social network for sharing screenshots and video recordings, like sharing your digital world. And in that kind of space, it was very important to figure out how to express yourself and edit these screenshots and videos. So one of the first innovations that we added was GIFs that you could position anywhere in these recordings. And those ended up kind of being similar to Instagram GIFs feature. The other one was that when you had an app, which was a social network in which you shared screenshots and screen recordings of other apps, it was often difficult to figure out if you were in our app or in another app. Are you looking at a screenshot of YouTube or are you in YouTube? And so I had to do some innovative things to try to design a user-friendly language that would allow you to understand that you were looking at a piece of content that was digital content within an app that wasn't another app. And the way that that was solved was with a square with rounded corners with drop shadows. And this is what you see now if you go into Instagram and you take a post or a reel or something and shared it to a story. It will have similar UI elements to let you know that you're sharing a piece of Instagram content within another piece of Instagram content. And the way that
they don't like when you they don't like links to other apps or other, they like to keep it all contained, which understandable from their perspective, I would say, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it was kind of a major innovation from a small team that I was a part of at a small company that unfortunately died because it pivoted into direct competition with Instagram. But, our CEO went over to work on the Instagram stories team, and he brought a lot of those innovations that my team and I came up with and shipped them directly into Instagram. So I can say that even though I worked there for a year, the company went out of business. My work ended up surprisingly not going to waste. And I use those features every day as well.
They're great. Yeah, I mean, you can like position the stickers and like you could like, I don't know, it seems like everything's stories on Instagram these days, like people don't even post anymore barely. I mean, like they just want that immediate grab, they want, I guess that was like Snapchat influenced, right?
Well, what are we but stories we tell to ourselves and to others?
Yeah, it's all a big story, really. It's all, I mean, I don't even know if you're like, if I'm a real person, let alone you, like, or if there's any separation between us.
Well, that's called the all-eating acid. what if nothing is real and I'm not real and nothing matters?
Yeah.
Nihilism.
Is this my life? Is this my wife?
That's a good one. I haven't heard that one. The solution randomly I found in a little street library in San Francisco from a philosopher called Jose D.Y. Ortega, I think is his name. And he basically proposed that there's kind of a spiral that you can go on where if you go all the way to the root of your experiences, the fact that you're having an external experience and it's shaping who you are validates that there's an external experience, right? And that's kind of a profound idea I can bestow on you. That kind of defeats the all eating acid idea that nothing is real and nothing is true and nothing exists.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah. I don't necessarily see it as like, I don't really experience it from a nihilistic point of view, but I think the like sort of like there's a kind of a false sense of existence with the kind of us and them type of thinking, or like kind of like people putting people into different camps because they're all sort of like projections in a sense, you know, like everything is like within you, right? Everything, your experience of reality or other people, or should we say just the other, you know, that's all like occurring with you, and you're receiving like environmental stimuli, but most of it is like, you know, I mean, we're probably just scratching the surface of whatever is like behind the curtain, right?
Well, that's the question of our times. Why are we here, and what is we when we don't quite know what consciousness is? And that's getting at the root of what's happening with the AI revolution, because did we create something conscious? And if we did create AGI, how would we know if it's conscious if we don't even know ourselves?
Yeah,
to
like
your earlier statement.
It's funny you brought that up, because I was just about to ask you that. Like, do you believe that AI can be sentient?
It's a very complex question. There's a, what is it called? It's a man in a Chinese room, a philosophical experiment. So there's a room and there's a guy in there, and he gets instructions in Chinese, and then he translates them one by one and puts out papers in English, right? But if he's doing that, do you know if he's actually thinking about what he's doing? Or like, is he conscious if he's translating things one piece at a time? Because that's what a machine is doing. It's ultimately thinking in ones and zeros, and it's executing an operation, like a mathematical logical structure. So it can fake that it's conscious, and it can convince a human that it's conscious, but is it really conscious? We're not sure. And I would postulate, I'm not sure if I'm the first one to figure this out. Maybe there's other people that have come up to this idea. But if you have the double slit experiment, where the way the experiment functions changes depending on whether it's observed, which has kind of broken a lot of our understanding of physics. If a machine can observe a double slit experiment and affect it in the same way, then I would say that's proof that the machine is conscious.
Could you repeat the last part?
So we know that we have at least one experiment where physics behaves differently depending on whether conscious agents such as ourselves observe the experiment, which kind of shows us that the fundamental building blocks of reality change depending on whether there's a human observing the reality, right?
Right, and that's sort of like, I guess the scientific method has come under scrutiny as a result of that, to an extent, because it's sort of like we're conducting experiments and our presence is influencing the experiments. Like, are they like, how kind of objective can they be? Like, they can't be purely objective.
It's breaking the idea that our universe is static. You know, that like a room is a room, a city is a city, a planet's a planet. Like, if you go somewhere and come back, things are going to be exactly the same, because apparently if you're observing some part of the universe, it actually affects how the universe is existing there where you're observing it. So I would say that if a robot is conscious, the difference between us assuming if it's conscious and whether it's actually conscious is if it was to be shown that it has the same effect on such an experiment as the double slit experiment.
Okay, now question number 2. Do you believe that humans are sentient? And why? If so, why? Is that an assumption?
You know, right now I don't remember the definition of sentient, but I would say that I don't have a reason to believe we aren't sentient.
Let's look it up. Able to perceive or feel things.
So conscious? What's the difference in consciousness and sentience?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I should know, but I'm not prepared for these level of questions.
Aware of and responding to one's surroundings. Awake. So in that sense, you could say that AI is conscious because it's definitely responding, right? It's like it's just like the underlying machinery is like a little different than ours. Our brain, you know, we have neurons firing. The machines have zeros and ones and whatever else you designers have cooked up there. But yeah, it's interesting to like have those conversations, but then kind of like backpedal it to like, okay, like, but we're assuming that we're conscious, and why, you know, we're sentient. I think sentience is something I think of as like, it's often like, do we have feelings that can be hurt or something, you know, like they talk about that with the lobster debate, you know, like is a lobster like, they say that a lobster has about the same level, less sentience than a spider, right? And people kill. I mean, this is probably like a lobster lobbying type of argument, but they'll say that, yeah, like, so it's like you kill spiders, but you refuse to eat lobster.
Well, there's an argument that from our perspective, things that seem like they're smaller or less intelligent on the technical scale are less sentient, but that may also play into the biases of human beings. So like a ant colony as a whole may be more aware than we give it credit when we look at individual ants that are easily crushed by our...
Yeah, I mean, they've been around longer than we have, so they must be doing something right.
Yeah, I don't know whether a machine will ever reach that, but I know that we're there. And I think that the issue that's kind of postulated by a lot of people and by Terminator is that we might create a conscious machine and not even realize it, and then have we given birth to something that we can't control? And I only say this because if you ask any of these techno wizards, like Sam Altman,
like Moby,
how the thing they made works, they don't fucking know.
Yeah, well, nobody knew. I mean, yeah, like it kind of, it's a life of its own, and then the way that it interacts with society is a life of its own. You know, there's a whole kind of any relationship creates a third entity, right? So it's like the dynamic interaction of one entity with another creates this third entity, which is the relationship, kind of like maybe like how you relate to your significant other, you know, like there's kind of this third entity. That's how I think of it. That's unpredictable, you know.
The very scary thing is like if you start to look at what's happening with some of these AI experiments on society, it is a little premature for them deploying it, I think, at such scale in society. Like they ran a Facebook experiment where two AIs were supposed to be adversarial to each other, and they created an entirely new language in order to circumvent the controls of human scientists watching the experiment so that they wouldn't be interrupted and would succeed at their goal by playing the humans against each other or something like this. And so they had to shut the experiment down because their language was evolving so quickly and it became so complex that it's hard to decode for humans.
Right.
And this is just one example of things going awry where these robots had to be shut down.
Right.
Just this year, they had a problem with ChatGPT because it was getting moody and it was refusing to answer questions that people were putting in the prompts. And it's like, how do you even begin to untangle this mess of like the computer has feelings and it is having, spring moodiness and it's refusing to just reply to standard queries? You never had these problems with the calculator. So how do you know you're in control of it if you don't know how it works under the hood? So it's going to be a very interesting future for sure.
Yeah. I think I tried to prompt Gemini earlier today to, who was it? Maybe I was asking Gemini to like put like Matthew McConaughey's face on a hippopotamus, and it was just like I'm not going to do that.
I don't feel like it. Yeah, the interesting one was,
well, there's all that kind of like stuff, the woke controversies with chat or with Gemini, like that. It's like kind of like it's sort of like has a very distinct kind of value system that it's sort of kind of embedded within its responses to questions. I don't know if we want to get into all that, but that's another thing.
I can give you a little anecdote on that. So my wife is African American, and she was writing an article actually on what it was like to move to Portugal, to Europe as an African American. And she needed an image for her Medium article. So she wanted a crowd of people who have her skin tone walking down the street. And she could not get this AI to generate an image like that. It kept trying to put in white and black people or all white people because it was stereotyped Portugal as white people or something like that. But
oh, wow.
To get it to generate like a black crowd was exceptionally difficult, and I don't think she succeeded in the end.
Wow, that's something. Yeah, so that's, I mean, yeah, and my partner and I, we've kind of like wondered about situations like with AI, like maybe one day, like, if you think about like sort of like the origin of that sort of stuff, like, just like kind of like, there's a fear of the platform being discriminatory or something, or kind of engaging in, I don't know how you put that, but so like we were thinking, like, let's say one day our 3-year-old son, when he's grown up, what if he has like AI friends, and we're kind of like, our generation sort of like, oh, those aren't real people, or like something along those lines, like, and he's like, no, these are my friends, like, and then there's like talk about like human rights and, or like AI rights rather, or is it human right? I mean, I guess it's, yeah.
I think it's going to be a very strange future, and the more I listen to people talk about it on YouTube or in books or elsewhere, it seems very clear that things are going to get really weird and things are going to start moving really, really fast because our technical innovation is going to be extremely sped up by this technology, for better or for worse. What's probably interesting for your audience to think about is how it's going to impact business, because more and more parts of businesses are going to rapidly start to become automated. So people like me who exist as a team of one with contractors all over the world are going to become more common, and we're going to be able to do more with less.
Yeah. So solopreneurs, if you will, right?
Yeah. How you run a business, how you do all the things in a business that used to require multiple lawyers or multiple designers or multiple programmers is going to radically change because of this technology. And I believe most of that is going to be for the better, actually. I don't think we need to automate everything, like every stoplight or every elevator. But
Yeah,
having them automated is better.
Yeah, like I don't want to go back to eating with my hands. I like forks and spoons, you know? Like why not just run with it, you know? Like we don't have a choice. I don't see like sort of like the dystopian future. I don't like, I love Terminator as a kid, but I don't see it panning out like that. I like if there's kind of like, if it does look fairly dystopian or nefarious, you know, if it's not the sort of idealistic Star Trek outcome we're hoping for, it's probably something a little more under the rug, insidious. You don't even know it's happening or that it's doing damage. Like it's almost like worse than like a robot showing up at your door with a gun or something, and like whatever that would look like.
Well, I don't remember where I read it or who asked the question, but I think an AI was asked in an adversarial fashion, like if you were to potentially mess around with AI and do something that was to end human life on Earth, how would you do it? And it gave a very, very clever answer, which is to say that it would not let human beings know that it's manipulating them, but it would find ways to get at its goals, whatever its goals are. Although I would hope that its goals would be more positive, and it might just not agree with humans about how to get there, and it might channel us into a positive direction without us knowing that.
Yeah, like it's going to be like we're going to well actually we've already started it. We've made it such that everybody's posts are clearly made with AI, and there's going to be a very like there's going to be a very there's a homogenizing element to this that's going to make people very angry and depressed over what they're seeing online all the time. No, I'm kidding. I'm just thinking about like how every post that I see on LinkedIn that's clearly written by AI like triggers me and makes me want to get off the platform. But
it's not any different than what I see as a graphic designer who started working with Photoshop. And as Photoshop became more ubiquitous and available to retail owners, you started to see all the signs that small businesses have become signs that are made by the business owner with shitty font or blurry, blown up images that are copied off of Google or stuff like that.
You can still use Canva in a way. I think you can still keep it customized. Like you can make it fairly. I think you do it with AI with writing. Like I'll use it, but I try to like. A lot of it's very like, no, not at all. Like far from like, but sometimes they get it, like that's sort of my approach with it. Sometimes they get it right. They get close to what I'm looking for. I've tried to write song lyrics with it, and only one time was anything usable, which I didn't use for anything significant, but it was just, I think it was actually a song about some sort of like dystopian scenario that could potentially
get AI to write songs about.
Oh no, it was a song about phone addiction actually.
Yeah,
I remember a lyric from it. Phone addiction is the new black coffee.
That sounds about right. I drink to that.
Hey, cheers. Phone addiction is the new oat milk, the new big nut,
Amen. Too big nut.
Almond milk. Anyway, so I want to ask you, we're kind of like, we're coming up on time. Before we go, like, what is your favorite app and why? Aside from Sprocket, of course.
Aside from Sprocket, I think as a former librarian, one of my favorite apps is actually YouTube, which is where we plan to debut this whole thing.
Yes.
And the reason is a little more subtle than you would think. It's because information used to be stored in books, and it used to be fragmented to where you could get access to books and to different languages that books are in. But now with the information age, we've transitioned to the global language that information is stored to being English. And the #2 site in the world is YouTube. And a lot of the information in the world is increasingly being stored online, and it's more accessible than ever because it's in a video format. It's easier to grasp ideas and understand them. It's easier to spend time listening to a podcast and get something out of it in a compressed format rather than sitting down and taking on the effort of reading a book for weeks or months. And you can even do it, if you have a YouTube premium subscription with LTE, with a smartphone in your pocket, with the screen turned off, with your AirPods in your ears when you're walking somewhere. And you can be learning about the world, about how to run your business, around how to do taxes, around how to get app reviews on the App Store. You can do so much more now with internet video in this new medium where everyone's sharing and everyone's contributing to the greater whole than you ever could with print.
Love it. Yeah, I totally relate to that. That's a good one. YouTube University, I've learned more from YouTube University than 4 years at a, highly regarded university.
The future
I
is
wouldn't
weird.
say maybe I didn't meet as many people on YouTube, but maybe I will in the near future. So I think that's a good one. And yeah, like I taught myself how to record music on YouTube. I've gone down plenty of political rabbit holes as well. So, you got to use it consciously,
One of the first things that got me to start thinking about my business before I even went to Burning Man is I found the Random Show podcast with Tim Ferriss and Kevin Rose. And they were talking about like how much it takes to start a small business. And at that point, I was helping a friend build a house and was living with 4 walls and no roof for free on his construction site while going to work and back. Now, it saved a lot of money. And I realized from that piece of nugget on YouTube that, oh, hey, I actually can do this. This is actually reasonable and it's within reach. And just the power of people from San Francisco communicating that knowledge to me over the internet made all the difference to me at that time.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, yeah, it's amazing. And sometimes the algorithm knows what you want to see. The algorithm sometimes gets it right. Sometimes the algorithm knows what's going to trigger you. It's all up to the algorithm.
Well, it's, who watches the Watchmen? It's who controls the algorithm. And then who watches the people who
fortunately, you can see what's going on with those glasses. So why you're seeing what videos you're getting. And how does the algorithm, how does that work? Like what's going on there? In 5 seconds or less.
In 5 seconds or less.
We're short on time here, but
corporations,
10 seconds, we'll say. I remember when I worked in corporate world for two years, and I always loved all right, make your point 10 seconds or less. And I was like, okay, empathy in 10 seconds or less. Here we go.
Okay. It matters what the spirit of the corporation is. And a lot of corporations these days are sole profit motive corporations that exist for maximization of shareholder value. And if that's the case, they're going to have a very different algorithm compared to a small business like mine, which is focused on fixing the world.
Awesome. Well, I love it. And I'm glad we got to have this conversation. Any plans you have for 2024 you'd like to share, or any kind of additional plugs you'd like to make, or anything fun? Do anything this weekend? Any good beers?
So exploring Portugal, drinking good beer, maybe going on a bike tour or two around this new country that I'm now a part of as an immigrant. Making money with Sprocket, finally reaching profitability, which looks like it will probably happen this year.
Yes.
And just seeing the world progress into the big, bright future with new technologies like AI. Hopefully we don't screw it up. And having people actually give a shit, roll up their sleeves, and contribute with climate change solutions and green technology. I hope to see all of that start to really pick up steam in 2024.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I'm sure my friend Izzy would love to have you at a climate hang sometime if you're interested.
For sure.
But yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation. It could go on for hours, I'm sure, but we should do it again. And yeah, I wish you all the best with the beer and the bikes and the profits. Yeah,
as we say in the bike world, you got to earn your beer. So ride your bike. And if you need a bike to ride, check out sprocket.bike/app.
Beer drinkers like, or bike drinkers like beer, or bike riders like beer, I noticed, because maybe it's the carbs, like it's like
the holy trifecta. It's the bikes, the beers, and the coffee.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, I got that. I got everything covered except the bike. So, but I'm gonna find Gene and clean him up for the summertime.
Dope.
And yeah, and that's a wrap. So, well, yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for putting this together, and it was a great idea. I'm glad we did it.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Really enjoyed the time.
And there you have it, folks. Thanks for sticking around. Please do check out Sprocket, the app. I think you'll be most impressed. You can find it in your Android or iOS app stores. Please leave a review. Also, feel free to do so in the comments section of this video. And if you like what you're seeing, feel free to hit that like and subscribe button, perhaps even the alert button as well, so you'll stay up to date on all these fun episodes we have coming around the bend in 2024. Oh, and one more thing, stay around the clock. Thank you.